Hi, in this video I will discuss the guidelines for the poetry explication, and I want to make sure that everyone knows where to find that information. So if you are in the table of contents in our class in Momentum, you will see under information for poetry explication, which you can find right there, you will see the guidelines. Okay. Now, if you have downloaded those before, you probably will want to download them again because I have made some updates to this document. Also, I have added a sample explication, which I will refer you to later on, but just remember that it's here. Also, I want to make sure that we differentiate between the information for the poetry explication section and the co-teaching project. Different pieces of information are available in both of those locations. I will place the videos that I probably will call co-teaching project elaboration videos. I will place those in the co-teaching project section. Let me say, though, before I get started on the explication directions or guidelines, that I think it's a very good idea for you to watch the videos about the elaboration on the co-teaching project before you watch this video about the guidelines. Because essentially what you're doing when you write your explication is you are going through the same thought processes that you have when you're preparing to teach your poem. So I think it would be very helpful for you to see the thought processes that I'm going through when I'm looking at Yusuf Komunyaca's poem Salome before you actually start thinking about, okay, how do I apply this in the written form of an explication. Alright, so I'm going to pull up those guidelines. I already have them. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through that and explain just a little bit about what an explication is and how you approach this whole process. So the words explication and analysis are not the same. So if you've written something before, like an analysis of some kind, it's really not the same thing as an explication. So as stated in the Bedford Introduction to Literature, an explication examines in detail the important elements in a work and relates them to the whole. So you're looking at multiple elements, whereas in an analysis you might just be looking at one. You might be looking at only, like alliteration. Or if we're talking about fiction, you might look at only symbolism, okay, for an analysis. So an explication is different. You're taking multiple elements into account, and you are relating them to the whole work. Additionally, this is also from the Bedford, an explication pays careful attention to language, the connotations of words, allusions, figurative language, irony, symbol, rhythm, sound, and so on. Another great handout for you to consider that I do want you to look at is this one. I've provided a link here. It's from Vanderbilt University. Now, in that handout, you will see toward the end of the handout suggestions for how you might organize your explication. And they list about, I think the handout lists about 3 different ways. I really want you to focus on the last 2, okay? I want you to focus on either stylistic devices or thematic elements. And I will show you examples of both of those. So if you are organizing by device, you are devoting an entire body paragraph to one element. All right, so if I think that a poem I am covering deals in, I don't know, like maybe alliteration, I'll have perhaps a whole paragraph devoted to alliteration. Now, you want to make sure that you have enough episodes of alliteration happening in the poem to actually warrant devoting a whole paragraph to that. But nevertheless, you can organize each body paragraph according to a specific element that you see going on in the poem, or you can organize it according to idea. So, and I will give you examples of that in a moment. You'll see what I'm talking about a little more clearly. All right, so the first thing you want to do is come up with a thesis. We know that the thesis really is driving everything else in the essay. So your thesis has to be clear, and you have to know what you think is happening in the poem, what the theme is, all right? So first you want to come up with a one-sentence thesis that expresses the key elements that will be examined in the poem. So you might think about literary devices such as diction, figurative language, figures of speech, line structure, rhyme, alliteration, okay, any number of elements that you think are helping to reveal the poem's theme. And yes, you must state what you believe the theme is in that same sentence. So you will place the thesis at the end of the introduction. Your introduction does not have to be very long because this whole entire paper is not very long. So you don't want an inordinately long intro when you have a short paper, right? So you want to place the thesis at the end of the introduction. So I'm going to use a couple different examples. One is based on the poem Fusion by Georgia Douglas Johnson, and you can find that poem in your Bedford textbook. I didn't give the page number here, but it's you can look it up easily enough in the index. So this poem really isn't long enough for me to have offered it to you as one of your possible poems to teach, but it will work for the purposes of illustrating how you might set up a thesis, right? And different ideas that you could look at when examining a poem. All right, so if I were examining the poem Fusion by Georgia Douglas Johnson, I could discuss maybe extended metaphor, word choice, and tone. And I would want to think how I might make a body paragraph for each of those in my explication. But nevertheless, here is a sample thesis using that concept or those concepts. Through the use of extended metaphor, word choice, and tone in her poem Fusion, Georgia Douglas Johnson celebrates the ways in which a multiracial heritage enhances humanity while acknowledging the challenges that multiracial individuals might face. So that's a sample of, or an example of, a thesis that I might make if I were looking at that particular poem. Now, that's using the approach of organizing it by maybe literary device, okay? If I wanted to organize it according to possible, like ideas I'm seeing in the poem that relate to the overall theme, then I would do that differently, and I'll show you an example of that. So when I was looking at this poem, I was able to come up with a few different overall ideas that I was seeing at work in the poem, and then work that into a thesis statement. Georgia Douglas Johnson's poem Fusion shows how people can derive pride from a multiracial identity by believing they are here by design, by focusing on their innate beauty, and by viewing conflict as a means of empowerment. So the overall theme is how, people should experience pride. It's a point of pride to be multiracial. I think that's kind of the theme I'm driving at there. So those different ideas that I see at work in the poem are contributing to that theme. Now, the next example we will look at involves Yusef Komunyaku's poem Salome, and so that's why I recommended earlier that you should really watch those videos I made about the elaboration on the co-teaching project directions, because it will be harder for you to understand where I'm going with this if you're not familiar with my ideas already. But I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to pick up with that example in the next video.